Welcome back, listening audience. This is the Guns and Mental Health Podcast, brought to you by Walk the Talk America. Our title sponsor is Arms Corps, and we are hopefully getting some more sponsors in. I'm very excited about that. Ruger just contributed a significant sum of money, and we're very grateful to have them on board. But today, we're bringing to you somebody who's been here before, John Petrolino. Hello, John.
Hi, how are you, Jake? It's nice to be back with you and Michael. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we got three bearded Italian men back. It's always nice to see, and somebody whose beard is all of ours combined and then some. Cam Edwards. Hello, Cam.
Hey, how are you guys? Thanks so much for the invite.
Thank you for making the time to show up. I know you're super busy, and it means a lot to us that you would participate. So thank you. And as always, I'm joined by Michael Sudini. Hello, Mike.
What's going on, man? It's good to be back.
It is good to be back. It's been a little while. Over Christmas and New Year's, we took a little bit of a hiatus, but here we are again. So we got two authors with us, and somebody who is, a couple of guys who are really close to suicides in the firearms community. And it's the Guns and Mental Health Podcast. We talk about this stuff so that it creates inspiration for others. It demystifies a lot of what we do to try to bring light to the darkness, so to speak. And there's some pretty personal stories coming out. So I'm going to kick it over to Mike, because Mike's got his own personal story. People have heard it a bunch of times, I'm sure, but I think that's the appropriate tee up to today's show. So
yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start off, Cam, and John, you know this, you know a little bit about my background, but I got into the firearms industry through nepotism. I got in working behind the scenes at one of the largest importers. Basically what my family did was they took firearms from different countries and gave them representation in the US. We'd handle their sales, their marketing, their customer service, and their warranty, right? Some of the brands that you might know of were Bursa from Argentina, or American Classic from the Philippines, or Grand Power from Slovakia. So we had a number of different lines, but in 2009, the president of my company, a near and dear friend to me, took his own life with a firearm. And being that I didn't grow up around firearms, I kind of got in, like I said, through the family business. I was able to observe a lot of things about the industry. And one of the things I thought was very odd was that we couldn't talk about suicide by firearm, right? Because we were afraid that it would be weaponized against us, which in many cases it could be. But that's something that affects our industry and our community. I mean, on such a great level, especially when you think of how we hold our first responders, our veterans, active duty military close to our hearts, right? And just how, if you go to any gun show, whether it's the NRA show or you go to SHOT Show or even EWA, how many first responders and veterans and people that come to those shows just to hang out and talk to people or meet people like yourself, right? So I kind of wanted to share that story because that's in 2009, that's really when it kind of it hit real close to home to me, right? Because it was right there, and we kind of just moved on and didn't talk about it. And I thought that was very odd, especially because Bill Strominger was somebody who is very influential on the business side of the industry. Then we cut to 2018, and I get this opportunity to bridge the gap between mental health and firearms and start this organization called Walk the Talk America. And here we are today. So I kind of just wanted to, man, I'm just happy you're on the show. I feel like I know you just because I watched your show. I've listened to you. I've read your articles. So I kind of just want to have a discussion about the industry and suicide and how it affects us and everything like that. So I'm just glad you're here.
Well, listen, I'm glad to be here. And this is an issue that I think you're right. I think we are reluctant to talk about it because it does get weaponized. Look, I'll be honest. I don't like the idea of talking about preventing suicide by gun. I like talking about preventing suicide. And obviously as gun owners, we have to be aware that, suicide by firearm is one of the most lethal forms of suicide, right? It's much more effective. It's permanent. It lasts. But I too get bothered by this insistence that, well, the only way to address this issue is through more gun control laws, because you're right, that puts our back up. And as the editor of Bearing Arms, I think most people know that the founder of Bearing Arms, Bob Owens, took his own life. And Bob and I were close, but I'll tell you, I was much closer friends with some of Bob's close friends, and I saw firsthand the devastating effect that Bob's death had on his friends and his loved ones. And this is something that, again, there is that sort of impetus of, well, let's not talk about it because there was a gun involved. But to me, it's when we give in to that apprehension, we're not able to move forward, and we're not able to talk about these things. And we absolutely need to, because I think the best way of addressing this is what we are seeing here, this sort of volunteerism, this idea of, listen, as long as we can talk about this, as long as there are options for people to, temporarily have somebody store their firearms if need be, I think that's a so much more effective way of saving lives, which is what this is about, than demanding that we have some sort of storage law, or we have a red flag law on the books. If we're looking out for each other, and if we as an industry are giving people those tools that they need to protect themselves, to protect their families when someone that they know or love is in a crisis, that matters. I mean, that counts. And so the work that you guys are doing at Walk the Talk America, I think, is so vitally important, because we shouldn't be afraid to talk about these issues, particularly at this point in time where I think, I saw a poll earlier this week. I think it was a USA Today Suffolk University poll. Something like 88% of Americans said we are in a mental health crisis in this country. And that was like 80% of Republicans, 85% of independents, 90% of Democrats. I mean, this is one of the few things we probably all agree on, is that it's been an incredibly stressful couple of years for almost everybody. And I think we're really, it's interesting to me that we haven't seen our suicide rates increase. I hope that stays, that remains the case. But again, with all of the stresses that we as a society are under, I think we absolutely have to be open and honest about talking about those things, ways that we can help ourselves, ways that we can help others. And part of that is having that conversation about what to do when somebody is, poses a threat to themselves or somebody else.
I want to jump in and remark that as the clinician on the screen, or if you're just listening to this, without video, we're trained in graduate school and in counselor school to dive into sensitive subjects. And I'll put that in air quotes that the listening audience can't see, but sensitive subjects with tact and grace and confidence that most common people don't. Right. So what are sensitive subjects? Well, it's usually like substance abuse and sexual orientation and sexual performance, finances, and suicide. Suicide is one of those. One of the things that doesn't get covered is firearms. So we as a clinical community tend to tap dance around and pussyfoot around the subject of firearms. So when you got two sensitive subjects, like maybe you're considering suicide because of your finances, we're supposed to be particularly well skilled at navigating those dynamics and those nuances. And I think what I'm trying to bring, from my perspective, from the clinical mental health perspective to the broader public, is the ability to engage in those conversations as easily as I've been trained to do. I don't think that quote unquote sensitive subjects should be a barrier to dealing with tough issues in life. And I think a lot of times the reason we just kind of wrap them up and stick them in the corner and pretend they don't exist is because of our own fear. And it's like, well, fear of what? Fear of having to address it, for sure, because then it means somebody's got to be responsible. Somebody's got to take accountability. Somebody's got to do something to change, whether or not your finances suck, or your sexual performance isn't where it needs to be, or you want to come out of the closet, or you think about taking your own life, right? We need to be able to have a reasonable, normal, confident conversation about all of those things in order to bring healing and help to people. We can't keep sticking it in the corner. And I think that the reason I have a journalism background too. It's my undergrad, and I wrote for a long time. I really enjoy writing. I think the reason that journalism broadly, and publications like yours specifically, and I'm looking at John and Cam together, are so important, is because we do have an opportunity, we have an avenue through which to bring that type of perspective, that type of voice, and to encourage people to say, hey, you know what, this isn't so spooky and scary. Like, we all go through this. If a human being is experiencing something, chances are really good that every other human being has probably experienced it too. So we can create community connectivity. We can shore up, resource deficient people. If you need a place to store your guns, hey, look, we got a connection here to store your guns, right? And I think that's why this is so important to me personally, is to have you guys on here to talk about the work that you do in bringing a voice to what is previously probably pretty voiceless. So thank you both in advance. But I want to ask both of you, you can take turns, I guess. John, when you're writing, because you've been such a big champion for us and talking about WTTA and what it does, and like, what's your impetus? Why are you motivated to do this? And what's your goal through the whole thing with all the writing that you do?
That's a great question. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Sound good.
Okay. That's a great question. I don't really have an answer for you. I mean, I've been writing for over 21 years, and I kind of stumbled into the Second Amendment writing. So there's that. And then you get into the finer points of this. So, like, talking about specifically pieces that deal with mental health, that deal with, like you said, some of these more sensitive subjects. I think it's important to bring a light to these topics, because maybe not too many people are really talking about them. And when people are talking about them, I don't think they're necessarily speaking, for us. So, like the Lorax, he spoke for the trees, right? So when you have all of these groups come together to speak for gun violence, or for stopping people from dying by suicide via firearm, or whatever the subject is, when you go on the legislative end of things, where's our Lorax, right? Our voice is very often not heard. Now, Michael, I know you've done work in DC. Is that correct? You've had the opportunity to deal with, legislators and those that make policy, correct?
Yeah. I mean, we're not in the legislative part. We dip our toe in it. We field questions. We answer. What the most important thing that we get, John, is like, and Cam, like, this is what I love about this, is like, now when something happens, we get the phone calls from the people that I guess you'd say are on the other side, right? The mental health side. And they say, well, we've been asked to back this. Why can't we back this? Or why shouldn't we back this? Explain it to me again, why this doesn't fly with your people.
Mike's frozen.
Right.
Okay,
And
so-
that's really,
Oh, there he is.
now
He's
that
back.
they're pausing and going, yeah, I'm back. Right. So I think that that's what's important.
And just to finish off on my statement about that is, why do I write about this? Somebody's got to bring it to light. And I try to do so in a very well-organized manner, because there are groups, Walk the Talk America being obviously in my opinion, one of the forerunner groups dealing with mental health and firearms together. Another group that, and Cam's also aware of them and has done work with them, is Doctors for Responsible Gun Owners. And taking these topics that are, they're being weaponized against gun owners, and we can't let clinicians and physicians that are being used on a pulpit against us without our voices being heard. So we have to talk about these issues. We have to write about them. And we spoke in the past about, reading the comments, like, you don't want to read the comments. Well, I read the comments. Maybe I shouldn't read the comments. And you get a lot of that pushback that's like, well, why are we talking about this? And suicide could happen any other way. And I agree with that. Stopping suicide overall is an important thing. And when we look at the 2/3 of deaths by firearms being suicide, and we want to be categorized as this very violent country that's got all this bad gun violence, using air quotes to the listeners. Um, well, 2/3 of that, people are more willing to use a firearm on themselves than they are on their fellow man. And I'm all about the statistics, and you look at a lot of different numbers and stuff like that. But that's what it boils down to. Nobody wants to talk about that number. Take those 2/3, throw them out, not because they're not meaningful. They're very meaningful. But if you're going to talk to me about violence and you're going to talk to me about crime, those numbers mean something else. And that's a different topic that we need to discuss. And that's what Walk the Talk America, I feel, is here for.
A great point. And to Cam's point earlier about how we want to stop suicide broadly. Well, we figured out that the connection between firearms and mental health is through suicide. So my job now is, yeah, suicide prevention is great. And what about healing marriages? What about improving parenting so that parents aren't yelling at their children? What about curing drug addiction? All of that comes through the mental health care perspective and intervention strategies that we offer. Now, if we start with that, we'll get to suicide, and we're going to eliminate a lot of it. We just happen to be a bunch of gun owners who recognize that this is a big problem because the lethality, right? So I'm interested, Cam, what's your deep interest in this besides the personal anecdote that you shared earlier?
Well, I think that, as John said, when we hear the talk of quote unquote gun violence, and you hear suicide lumped in with violent crime, to me, these are two extremely different issues that have, very different solutions and very different strategies that we need to employ. So I'm with John. I mean, I don't like leaving this up to the gun control movement to talk about, because this is, critically important for gun owners. And when we are silent on this, and all of a sudden the other side, the people who don't really respect the right to keep and bear arms, who would be fine with that right going away, then they're the ones not only leading the conversation, they're the only ones having the conversation with mental health experts, with, legislators. And so we can't just shut up and expect that this issue is going to go away. But I also don't think that you can leave the personal out of this. I think for those of us who care about this issue and who write about this issue and talk about this issue, I would guess that most of us have, at least one experience in our life where somebody that we love or somebody we know has been touched by suicide. My wife's brother committed suicide when he was 19. I don't actually talk about this a lot because this isn't really my story to tell. It's her story to tell. But, that is something that has been a part of our relationship, because it's been a part of her life, the entire time that I've known her, for 25 years. This has been part of our conversation. And when we first got married, it was, I was the one who wanted to own a gun. I came into the marriage. I've talked about this before. I grew up in a gun-free household. It was just sort of, we weren't anti-gun. It just wasn't really an issue. I had a single mom growing up. She just wasn't a gun owner. Didn't really talk about it. But when I met my wife, she was a single mom in Camden, New Jersey. And at the time, that was the murder capital of the United States. This is back in the late 1990s. And, we're on the phone one night just talking before we'd even met in person. And I heard the sound of gunshots through the receiver of the phone, and then she wouldn't answer me. And I spent a night thinking that she had been shot and killed. And it turns out she fell asleep as we were talking. And the next day, I asked her, I was just gobsmacked. I was like, what are you talking about? How could you fall asleep? I could hear the gunshots through the phone. And she said, this is Camden. Gunshots are like crickets where you live. And so that was the moment I kind of realized, okay, maybe the gun control laws aren't everything they're cracked up to be, but I still wasn't a gun owner. But then when we got married, and all of a sudden, not only an instant husband, but I'm an instant dad too. I've got an 11-year-old stepdaughter. I've got a 6-year-old stepson. We're living in a not great neighborhood in Oklahoma City. Protecting my family became really important to me. And my wife and I had these conversations because at first she was like, nope, don't want anything to do with guns. Don't want to have them in the house. Don't want to look at them. Don't want to touch it. Don't even talk to me about it. And so we went through a process as we, we're wrestling and trying to figure out, what it's like to live with one another. And that was one of the conversations that we had, was that, okay, I don't want to feel like I'm defenseless. It was one thing if it's me, if it's just me being by myself. But now that I've got other people that I'm responsible for, that I care about, that I love, that I want to protect, all of a sudden this was an issue that became important to me. And so, we had these conversations, but I was always very cognizant of the relationship that my wife had with firearms, which was she didn't own a gun. She never had touched a gun, but her brother took his life with a gun. So, this has always, I think, been something that has been at least in the back of my mind. But really what got me thinking more about this was a couple of years ago. We talked on, when I hosted Cam and Company on RATV, we would talk occasionally about this topic, but it was when I ran across this story about what Dr. Amy Betts is doing in Colorado with the gun owners and the firearms instructors about, having this network where people can go and they can, even if they're not in a mental health crisis, if they're just, going out of town for a couple of weeks, they want to leave their guns unsecured. There's a place where you can go and you can have these people temporarily watch over them. This map that Dr. Betts and these folks put together, I thought this was such a great idea because it's such a low pressure way of introducing this topic. I think one of the things that happens, as you say, because gun control activists are the ones who've been driving this conversation, man, as soon as you mention firearms and suicide to a gun owner, we shut down, right? And it's not necessarily that we don't want to talk about it, but we just sort of instinctually know, okay, here comes the lecture. Here comes somebody wagging their finger at me, telling me why I'm a bad person because I don't support their policy solutions. And one of the things that I think is really important is to show that it's not that gun owners don't care about this issue. It's not that gun owners are apathetic about this issue. It's just that we have different ways of addressing this topic that we think are going to be more successful, that we think are going to be more productive, that we think are going to save more lives than, trying to ram another law down our throats. And so I don't think we cannot talk about this. And you're right that it is uncomfortable, Jake, that these painful topics sometimes, again, I get reluctant to talk about these things. And I'm a broadcaster, been doing this for 20 plus years. But there are situations and topics that we tend, I think, to just shy away from, not even necessarily as gun owners, but just, again, as human beings. But we can't do that. We just can't. This is an issue that's too important for us to leave to the people who don't respect our rights. And it's too important for us to leave for the people who we love and we care about, who may find themselves in a crisis one day.
Now, let me pick your brain on that, because you've talked to more people than I have, and you've been, behind the camera more, well, in front of the camera, I guess, more than I have. In your experience, what is the barrier to discussing this stuff? In my mind, I break it out to fear. I'm an emotional functioning guy, for those who don't know. Fear, as sometimes it's a fear of facing the thing, don't want to, whatever. But I think more often it's a fear of just not being comfortable in the knowledge of what the dynamics, the information, the various perspectives are. And I say that because for myself, I don't tend to engage in conversations about topics that I'm not really well versed. I'm not going to go have a strong opinion about mining oil in the middle of Afghanistan, because I don't know enough. And I'm wondering if that's maybe the case, where there's this presumption of knowledge because, hey, we know guns. And it's like, well, I don't really know much about this mental health thing. And then put them together, I'm really on my heels. Is that it? Or is it something else? Like what's your experience, and how do we get through this?
I don't know if it's necessarily fear of the issue itself as much as it is distrust of the credentialed, of the professionals.
Sure.
And I think that is a huge part of it, because, I think that certainly for myself, I often feel like I'm being talked down to when you hear a gun control activist or a politician who is promoting, legislation that's ostensibly designed to be about mental health, but it seems like it's targeted more towards, just being a burden on legal gun owners. It's really easy to feel talked down to. And, when you feel like you're not respected, why on earth would you respect that person?
Right.
Why would you listen to somebody who is not willing to listen to you? And so I think that's actually been one of the biggest barriers, because, again, the gun control movement has been the ones pushing this issue. And so the reflexive response from a lot of gun owners is, well, screw you. Because if you're talking about this, I know you don't have my best interests at heart. So you must be trying to get rid of the guns rather than trying to save lives. So I think that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we have these conversations and these efforts taking place from gun owners, from people who, are not Second Amendment supporters in name only. I don't even know what that acronym would be, but, people who really do care about this issue, who are not interested in trying to ban our way to safety, but know that if we just leave it up to one side to have this conversation, that we're not actually going to solve anything at all. And I think efforts like this actually do help break down that distrust, because it does allow gun owners to say, oh, cool, these are people who are like me. They're not out there trying to ban my guns. They're not out there trying to pass a new law. They're out there trying to ensure that when somebody I know, or maybe myself, is in that rough spot, that there are going to be resources available for me, that I don't have to feel alone, that I don't have to feel like a sissy for reaching out and talking to somebody. I mean, I think that's part of it too, is that, I think tied into gun ownership is, a lot of ideas about what it means to be a man. And, even with the growth in female gun owners, society, I think, views gun ownership as the sort of, masculine a role that we play. And so I think there's also a reluctance, real men don't talk about their feelings. Well, I don't think that's necessarily the case. And so, if we can broaden this up to, allow folks to feel comfortable talking about what's going on in their lives, not necessarily in a podcast, but to their friend, knowing that they can, go to their buddy and say, listen, man, I don't want to burden you with all this, but I gotta talk to somebody. I think if more of us felt that, and even had that relationship, felt like we had that relationship with somebody, I think we'd be in a better space.
Do you think it's working? Is it changing? Are you seeing it in the last 2 to 3 years that, Mike's been doing the effort, and Emmy, and even, NSSF has made some efforts? Like, do you see it changing?
Yeah, I do see it changing. Again, it's, I'll go back to what John said about reading the comments, and so, you look, there are always going to be those folks who say, if you talk about anything other than shall not be infringed, well, then you're no friend of the Second Amendment. Right. And look, I mean, maybe that's good for likes on Facebook. Maybe that's good for likes on Twitter, but that's not the real world. I mean, I gave up social media a couple of months ago. I got to tell you, that has been a tremendous improvement for my mental health. So I don't care what those folks would say. I care about this community. I care about the millions of gun owners who are living their lives to the best of their abilities. And just like every other American right now, they're probably struggling a little bit. They may be going through some tough times. And I want them to be just as safe and healthy and happy as everybody else.
Yeah, it's so Jake and I went to San Jose State to speak at an event that it was kind of funny.
Here it comes.
Yeah. It was an event hosted by a veteran group, and Students Demand Action. Right. And I got a call out of nowhere from a professor there that's like, hey, I've been hearing about what you do. We have a veterans group, and we're against gun violence. We want to invite you guys up to speak. And, they paid for us to go there and everything. And we got a lot of blowback at first, because I think what happened is a lot of people saw Students Demand Action, Mom Demand Action, and saw us. And it's like, why are you sharing the stage with these people? But once again, because we'll go anywhere to talk to anybody, because we feel like we're actually presenting solutions to the alternative to the legislation, I think people need to know about it. And I'm glad we went, because, even the Moms Demand Action people said we kicked it off. Like, we were the ones that started off. So we brought the attention to suicide by firearm. Right. And that was something that was important for us. And then there could be no shenanigans after that. Right. Because once you start hitting them with those facts and those statistics, now they have to reshape the way that they're going to go up there and talk about things. And you still have your people that are still going to say, like, people shouldn't have guns or whatever. But one of the things Jake and I noticed, and this is really good. This is the time I noticed that it came back to haunt us in terms as the community by not being there. Right. They have monopolized the words like end gun violence. We don't want gun violence either. Why do they get to have that phrase? Right. Like, it's because they've never been challenged, or they've never seen that there's any other solutions out there besides the ones that they know. And I truly believe some of them are just ignorant. It really has nothing to do with, it's kind of like, well, if no one's going to do something, well, here's that something. Right. And I thought it was just fascinating. And Jake and I were blown away. What they did, and remember this, Jake, what she did with the paper where she's like, everybody take out your phones.
Yeah.
Right. And she's like, I want you to text this number. And, you know, everybody in the crowd, most of them probably had no clue who they were texting, but they were texting under the guise of let's end gun violence. That's such a broad statement. Right. And so now they're eating out of the palm of her hand, because no one's ever been able there to give any of these kids anything. They're half of them were college kids. Okay, yeah, I don't want people to die. I'm going to text that number.
Yeah, and then it was all right. Step 2 is sign the pledge, and step 3 was forward this to something or whatever it was. Like there was a 3-step process, and she was very deliberate, waited for everybody to do it. And I thought, this is brilliant. I mean, this is brilliant. And where are we? You know, it's like sitting on our hands, just shouting from the rooftops, hey, don't do that. we need to strategize. We need to leverage the emotion too. You know, it's like, yeah, that does pain me. Hey, it pains me to lose my rights. Let's get the youth on board. Right. So it was a good experience. I'm glad we did go. And for nothing else, we learned some strategy.
Yeah. Jake, how many people you think actually signed that thing and they're actually not anti-gun?
Oh, couple dozen.
Yeah, I mean, it's nobody wants people to die on both sides. That's just the one island we could meet on.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, it's, you know, the dispute is, okay, so what do you do to prevent this? Right. And I'm curious, I mean, do you think that in a way the gun control lobby is at an inherent advantage because what they're calling for, look, I mean, you see this all the time. You see politicians, we need to do something. And my response is always, no, you don't need to do something. You do something that works. But, you know, is there an inherent advantage for the gun control lobby because they say, look, here's what the something is that we're going to do, right? And it's a new law, it's new legislation. It's, you know, these 3 or 4 pieces of legislation. That's what we're going to do to save lives. Whereas what we're primarily saying is, listen, that doesn't work. What we need to do is build communities. We need to build stronger networks. We need to build resources. I don't know if that is as, I think it's just as important, but I don't know if it's as exciting for like the average college student who, you know, wants to say, hey, I'm doing something here. It also takes more work. You know, it's easy to text. It's easy to sign up and to say, I've done something. I'm going to pat myself on the back here. But to actually go out and to do this engagement and to, you know, create these networks, I think is a lot more difficult. And so I wonder if we're not just sort of inherently having to play catch up or work harder to get the same engagement that gun control groups can get.
Yeah, I think we're playing catch up. I think because if you look at it like I'd say, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, I don't think we had any alternative solutions, right? I think we always said, no, let's not just do something to feel good. Let's do something that works. But then again, as the industry, I don't think we could come forward. So like when I show up to one of these things now and people are like, well, what do you do? And I love that because I'm like, okay, I'm going to blow your mind here. I'm not just going to use buzzwords like, and the stigma of mental health, right? I'm not going to say things like that. I'm going to be able to say we get gun manufacturers to put mental health screenings in boxes that are free and anonymous, right? We throw courses to teach mental health clinicians to understand gun culture, right? Like these are things that people didn't think existed before. So I think, you know, back to your point, we're playing a little bit of catch up because we didn't have, you know, the, so to speak, ammunition to fire back and say like, hey, we are doing something. Actually, we're probably doing more than you because most of these things are, I believe, those key phrases, those buzzwords, you know, that really don't mean anything. It's like, okay, and gun violence. Mm-hmm. Hey, how do you want to do that? Like, what exactly are you doing? So I think we're getting there. You know, you talk about Dr. Emmy Betts and, you know, I was on the suicide prevention task force for the VA for the White House in 2019 with Dr. Betts, right? And it just, one thing I noticed is that I'm in a room full of 30 brilliant people, right? Whether or not they like firearms or, you know, not, whatever, they're gun neutral. Yeah, I could have sat there and listened to them and not said a word the whole time, but then I realized I'm like, I'm the only person from the gun industry here, but I'm here. I got invited. Like, when I got the invitation, I called Jake, and Jake's like, you have to go. Like, you are the only gun, you're going to be the gun expert there. And I'm glad. Obviously there were military people in the room that knew all about guns, but I was the only gun company guy. And I think that's a big change, right? Like, I think that's where we're going to catch up to this whole thing.
Yeah, I think the other angle here too is something I talk about quite frequently is the erosion of delayed gratification in our culture. Nobody wants to sit and wait for results to come in. It's driven by lots of things. I mean, certainly instant gratification has been pushed into our heads from things like, from the microwave oven all the way to the Google search engine. Things are getting faster. We want things instantly. We want them customizable to us. And so it's eroded our patience. We don't know how to tolerate distress. When we don't get what we want, we throw a fit. But also, we've just come to expect everything in short order. Now, overlay this with political campaign turnovers and election cycles. It's like nobody wants to wait 15 years for the results to come in when they're waiting to get reelected. So it's much easier to just pass some meaningless legislation, or even worse, some harmful legislation, and say, look at that and look what I did, and hang my hat on it, and reelect me and send me back next term. Whereas what we're doing is much more longitudinal. It's culture building, it's culture changing, and that takes a generation sometimes or more. And so I think that what we're doing is not only catch up, because it took forever for the gun community to figure out how to do something and then actually do it. And then we still don't have a bunch of people on board because they're all afraid, for all the reasons we listed off, to get on board. Once we do, the results aren't going to be in for a while. And that frustrates people. And I get it. I totally get it. But at the same time, we have to stop waiting for someone else to do something. People have to step up. Like I mentioned, Ruger at the beginning of the podcast just scratched us a check, which was great. They sent us $25K. It'd be nice if all the other major manufacturers did the same thing and then took another step forward and printed our screening link, WTTA.org/love, on all their boxes. Everything that goes out, all the hundreds of millions of printed materials that go out from all sorts of firearms manufacturers, from accessories to ammunition to the firearms themselves. Can you imagine the massive impact that would have in the community? And then, oh, by the way, you could talk about it. And it's like, well, what are you doing? It's like, well, look here. We're literally inviting people in to make sure that they're well. You can't argue that. Like, no, I think my solution is better. Just take them all away. It's like, oh, show me the evidence.
I like the talking about solutions that work. So the phrase that I like to bring up is quality compliance over compliance. So you've spoken about, we'll call it safe gun storage, which the zeitgeist were spinning this to say responsible gun storage, right? We want responsible gun storage. But when we are dealing with a legislator, they're going to call this the safe gun storage provision of the law. So take, for example, New Jersey. New Jersey has a law where it's unlawful for you to leave a firearm within access to a child. Okay. And that's a no-brainer. It makes sense. And the way that you limit that access to the child could be age dependent, right? So if your child can't reach the top of your closet because your child is crawling, that's leaving the firearm no longer within, access of the child. Well, we need to have, from the legislative stance, and this is just brand new here in Jersey, they were pushing for storage laws, say, okay, now it needs to be locked up and unloaded, and your ammunition has to be in a different space, locked up as well, separate from the firearm. And here's the thing, you look at the situation, the law already exists where the firearm is not supposed to be accessible to a child, and yet we still have children accessing firearms in the state of New Jersey, and we have these negligent situations that occur, and they're all bad, they're all tragic, nobody likes them, nobody wants to see them happen. Okay, so what about quality compliance? Instead of saying we're going to create a law that it requires you to lock up the firearm and keep it separate from the ammunition, we incentivize this. And how can you incentivize this? You can incentivize it by saying, hey, maybe we'll give you a tax credit, or we'll give you a rebate on, firearm storage devices. This is something that I'm, a big proponent of, is, pushing to incentivize this. This way you can have quality compliance with the people that are actually going to comply, because not everybody's going to comply to the law. If everybody complied to the law, we wouldn't be having this conversation probably. Things would be a very different lens that we'd be looking through. So why not look for quality compliance? And that's why when we look at researchers and groups that are pushing for legislation, and there's a researcher that I spoke to somewhat recently, and his shtick was, about saving lives, and I agree. I want to save lives too, but at the end of the day, he wants to use his research and push and say, well, if we have a safe firearm storage law, that's going to save lives in the way of preventing death by suicide. And if these researchers and these groups were a little bit more honest, and that's what I like about Dr. Emmy Betts, because she doesn't get involved in like saying, hey, you need to have this law. And, I had an opportunity to talk to her as well. And like the work you did, Michael, with convergence at the end of the study, there wasn't some sort of a punctuation saying these are the laws that we need to create. No, that's not about creating laws. It's about creating, we'll say, compliance in a sense of things that we can do to limit these risks or these outcomes.
Yeah, and some of that compliance is voluntary, right? That's what invitation over compulsion is.
Exactly.
Is where we go.
Exactly. And invite and make it inviting for somebody to want to do the right thing, so to say. I mean, sometimes you need a little bit of a carrot. I mean, everything in New Jersey is a perfect example. It's like 100% stick. That's all you get in Jersey is the stick. You don't get any carrot, zero carrot, zero carrots given in the state of New Jersey. So, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes, it does. And so it invites this conversation about, well, if you're going to give the stick anyway, don't we already have a bunch of flogging tools already within the law to punish the wrongdoers after the bad thing happens? Like, well, if we're really going for prevention, we could draw this out to COVID too. I mean, vaccinations and masks and distancing and all the things, right? It's like, if you get people to buy in of their own free will and accord because you've given them enough good information, they're just going to do it because it makes sense. It resonates with people. I could do the same thing in my therapy shop here, where I'm sitting across the room from a patient, and I'm like, all right, so here's how I see your case. You could do this, or you could do this, or you could do, pick choice C, and A, B, or C. Choice is up to you. I can't live your life. And then they pick what's best for them, right? I can't go in there and threaten that I'm going to not see them or send them to the inpatient facility if they don't comply with what I think is best for them. Ultimately, people are going to do what's in their best interest if they're properly equipped with the right information. Take it back to firearms, safety, responsible storage, negligence. Educate people, like keep guns out of the hands of kids. Like, that's common sense. All right. So now how do we get that message out down from the people who hold it up at the top and have traditionally held that information? How do we invite the 20 million gun owners who are brand new, completely ignorant? Like, well, we got to work through the shops. We got to work through the trainers and the instructors, and we got to work through the ranges, and just disseminate the information. It's not going to come from the top of, the legislative authorities with their sticks in their hand. And if anything, my experience has taught me that people resist. They don't comply when you threaten them. That's almost a surefire way to get non-compliance, if anything. You're muted, Cam.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I always say that disobedience is in our cultural DNA as Americans. I mean, again, you tell us you can't do this, we're going, oh, yeah, we can. And if you say, do this now, we say, no, I don't think so. So I think you're right about that in terms of, getting the backup. But I would also say, too, like, John, I mean, when you're talking about nothing but sticks out of New Jersey, you're right. And it's so frustrating because, I see this in communities across the country where we have seen the power structure for decades insist on this abstinence only approach to gun ownership, right? Gun ownership is bad. Don't own a gun. Just don't own a gun. Don't pick it up. Don't own one. Don't even think about one. Don't touch one. Well, that doesn't work. We've got 400 million guns in this country. We've got 100 million gun owners in this country. Whether you like it or not, that's what we've got. And people do want to be able to protect themselves. They do want a firearm for self-defense. We did just see millions of new gun owners embrace their Second Amendment rights for the very first time. So I wish that, for every one of these places like, let's New Jersey, let's just go say Phil Murphy. Every time Phil Murphy came out and said, we need this new law, I wish instead he would say, you know what, I'm going to go down and I'm going to go talk to a gun store owner. I'm going to go to a range. I'm going to actually spend some time talking to people, because you're right. This approach that we see now of compliance through mandates, compliance through legislation, compliance through potential criminal consequences that might come after the fact, I just don't think it does any good. I think we are a bitterly divided country. I think we're grumpy as hell. We don't really like one another. So when somebody from the other side, opens their mouth, our first response is automatically shut up. And that's why I think this conversation ultimately has to come from gun owners, and it has to come from the Second Amendment community, because, Michael, when you talk about going to, San Jose State, and there's that, students demand action. Look, as you're telling me this story, my eyes rolled back in my head. I couldn't help myself. That's just how I am. And I too, I pride myself on, I'll sit down and I'll talk to anybody, and I will, but I also know that 95% of people on the other side don't want to talk to me. So, that getting past those barriers would be great if we could have the other side be more productive, but I don't think we can depend on it. I don't think we can count on it. Again, I think we have to take that burden on ourselves. And so that does mean talking to gun stores. It does mean talking to firearms instructors in some of these areas where guns have been made to be taboo. We've got to find those few Second Amendment resources that exist. We've got to work to create more. And that is, I think you're spot on, Jake, when you say that this is the work of a generation. It's not something where there's a quick fix. We are building foundations, I think, right now. And from there, we get to build on those. We get to, make these stronger, more stable, larger networks that gun owners can utilize around the country. But right now, we are sort of starting out from a position of nothing.
Yeah, and I think it's instructive to us too to be patient with ourselves and not get black-pilled in the process, become all bitter and cynical and jaded, nihilistic to say it's not working, because we've only been at it for a couple of years. When we finally get a common conversation around mental wellness and emotional functioning and human vulnerability and interconnectivity throughout the gun community, the work will already been done. We won't have to thump people over the head and say, hey, you got to get yourself checked, because they'll already be checking on themselves. I guess my question at this point is like, what do we think the best method is? Is it from the loud voices in the community, the social media influencers, people like yourself, Coley Noir? Is it going to come from the grassroots, the homegrown mom and pop shops and the middle of Nebraska? Is it going to come from the manufacturers putting stuff on their boxes? Like, what do we think the most effective use of our resources is going to be?
Well, I'm going to say yes to all. I think
so
one
it's
of
a
the
game show. You can only pick one. No, I'm just kidding.
But, look, here's the thing. When we talk about, it's one thing to prioritize, right? And to say, okay, well, here's maybe what we think is going to be the most effective. But every one of those avenues that you just mentioned, Jake, is incredibly important, because there are people who, look, we should be using influencers. We should be talking to folks who have that audience. But there are a lot of gun owners who don't watch, gun videos on YouTube. Right. They don't care. That's not why they're into this. And so if we rely only on the influencer side, we're going to miss those folks. But, we may be able to catch them if we're working on the industry side. And I honestly think peer-to-peer communication is maybe the most effective way. And so again, it's trying to, getting those messages out to everyday gun owners so that they can take those lessons and apply them to their life, and they can find those resources so that they can talk to their friends or themselves if need be. They know internally, okay, hey, I learned about this. Maybe I need to talk to somebody. right? Maybe I'm the one in a crisis right now. I just don't think that we can afford to ignore any of those things. And so I think that maybe it's up to those of us who care. What's our specialty? Where can we as individuals do the most good for the movement as a whole?
Yeah, I guess I asked that out of the spirit of being the practitioner. My ears perked up when you said, like, we don't like the credentialism or the credentialed people talking down to us. I'm like, oh yeah, I know, I'm among them. they're pretty insufferable sometimes. And trust is a big thing. And I'm one voice. I'm happy to be part of something that amplifies that with Mike and Rob and you guys. It's great to be a part of that. I'm trying to figure out how we communicate that we can be trusted. Like the most of us are trustworthy. Most of us in our community, and I mean, it's like the large majority of it, even though we may have our own opinions about guns and that may come through in some sessions sometimes, most of us are not picking up the bat phone to the government to tattle on you, right? Like we just don't. We're bound by our ethics, we're bound by our laws. And I need to get that out, because there's videos out there like this one from Johns Hopkins that made me want to throw up in my mouth a little bit, that literally tells physicians how to get patients to red flag themselves. I'm like, no, we need to take that down. That destroys all credibility for all professionals.
Can I interject for just a second, Jake? Because I would say it's more than just saying we got to take that down. It's calling that out. Right. We need credentialed folks like yourself when we see that to go public. You want to be trusted? Then be that credentialed voice that makes gun owners say, yeah, I've never heard somebody in Jake's position say something like that before.
It's funny because I was going to do that, and I just never got to it. And then a part of me was like, I don't know if I want to spend the time. I don't know who's going to see it, but you know what? You're right. I do need to do that. I need to dismantle that video because it's awful. It's awful. And I know why. And I can pick it apart
too.
Do
the breakdown video.
Yeah.
Pause the tape right there. Right. Like when we watched that video together, we were blown away. And you're right, Cam.
I needed to hear that. Thank you. I needed to hear that. Thank you. Yep. I will. That'll be my homework in the next couple of weeks. I'll get a better software editing program or video editing, I should say. But you're right. You're right. I need to put my money where my mouth is.
But look, I'm not calling you out specifically, but I'm just saying, all of us, I think, have that opportunity or will have that opportunity. But it's just that, that's your world. For John or myself, when, if we see an influencer or a 2A writer, poo-pooing the idea of these sort of voluntary associations and using common sense as opposed to, a legislative mandate, we need to push back about that too. And, look, I don't feel like spending my days getting into a online fight with, other Second Amendment supporters. It's not really what I want to do, but we all need to, I think, if we're passionate about this issue, then we need to be able to passionately engage and push back in a constructive fashion, right? Not just, name calling, but to say, look, here's why I think you're wrong. Here's why I think this is important. And here's why I think you can care about this issue without becoming a gun banner or a hoplophobe.
Hoplophobe.
Cam, I have a question for you, and John, you could chime in on this too. Where do you feel like the industry is right now, or just the community is right now? We do have all these new gun owners, right? The statistics and the records show it. Being that the NRA is a little down, right? I feel like everyone always considers that as our leader, and our leader might not be in the best position right now. You have all these different groups. I mean, how do you feel like the industry is right now?
John, you want to take that?
Sure. Is the industry, so the business of selling firearms is obviously booming. So you're right. The numbers are showing that. Now, the NRA has some issues that they are working through. That's just probably the nicest way we can all say that. That's not to say that there isn't work going on with other organizations as well. The NRA, I think they're important. So is the Second Amendment Foundation. So is the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms. So is the Firearms Policy Coalition. All of these big groups, they're all still marching on and getting work done. The NRA is actively working now. They're still working. Just because they're down doesn't mean they're not working. albeit maybe not as much as we would like to see, but they do have problems. But as far as Second Amendment health goes, and I think that the NRA was targeted as the boogeyman, right, to the anti-freedom caucus, as I like to refer to them, and thinking that if they take down the NRA or damage them or injure them, and we could say maybe they're injured right now because they're dealing with this, lawsuits, that all of their problems would go away from the gun rights crowd. And they were sorely mistaken, very, very much so mistaken, because these other groups are still active and they are doing the work and they are doing the lawsuits. You have, like I said, FPC, Firearms Policy Coalition, has been suing everybody left and right. Second Amendment Foundation, same thing. San Diego County gun owners, they've been getting involved all over, California. So how is the industry, if you mean the industry in the way of the gun rights industry of groups and organizations that want to preserve the Second Amendment, I think we're still very strong, and things are still going very well for us, even though, yes, the NRA is maybe down and out, or sitting this one out, right? We'll say they're sitting this one out. Like the last election, the last presidential election, they didn't really have a lot, to say or to get involved. But that doesn't mean that these other groups have been quiet, and they are working. And if people are looking for more groups, look up the ones that I just brought up. I mean, they're all doing the work as well.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, I'm going to be going out to SHOT Show next week, hopefully, if my flight doesn't get canceled and the Omicron wave doesn't swamp us all. And I'm actually curious. This is one of the things that I'm curious to actually talk to industry folks about, because, like most people, I mean, John has been lucky enough to be able to leave the house and go to work, over the last couple of years. But, I've basically been stuck on a farm for like the last 2 years. I've actually had very little communication with most other people. So
that sounds lovely, by the way.
It has its charms.
Choose to live on farms are usually embracing that. So let's just get that out of the way.
You notice I'm not complaining too much about this. I do have a smile on my face, but I do feel a little isolated, a little too socially distanced, and so I am looking forward to having these face-to-face conversations with industry folks, maybe from 6 feet away, to talk about this, because it seems to me like this would be a really good time for the industry to, if we can get them to focus. I wonder if the supply chain issues and, some of the other nuts and bolts stuff is not kind of getting in the way. But if we can, hey, look over here, all these new gun owners, let's talk about how we're going to, help these folks, what we can do to make sure that these folks are strong and successful and stable. And if they do need help, let's make sure that we've got the resources to get it. It seems to me like this would be a really good time to have that conversation, particularly since I think, generally speaking, we're in a pretty strong point in terms of having our rights safe and secure. We're not there yet, but if we get a good decision from the Supreme Court in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, let's say the Supreme Court takes a case and strikes down bans on quote unquote assault weapons. If we get to a point where our right to keep arms is secure, our right to bear arms is secure, we don't have people trying to ban the most commonly owned rifle in America today, then I think gun owners may feel like, okay, cool. You know what? We've got now this solid foundation for our Second Amendment rights. And now maybe we can start to focus on issues that are not, directly related to protecting that right. But now we can maybe open ourselves up to having these conversations about mental health and some of these other things that maybe get brushed aside or are seen as not as important. I'm fine, so I don't need to care about this issue. I think within maybe a year or two, we're going to be at a point where a lot of gun owners can say, okay, cool. We've got some of these basics now locked down, and that allows us to, again, just sort of explore a little bit more some of these issues that we have left untouched, or at least left under covered and under engaged for a long time.
That's a great point.
That's the goal, because my whole thing is I feel like we can get we can get the gun industry to where the alcohol industry got with DUIs, right? Nobody's blaming Johnny Walker when somebody gets behind the car and does something tragic. And I think we can get there. I really do. Like, I have that optimism if we, as the collective community, meaning the 2A, the pro 2A, you know, influencers and all the people that make it up, and then the industry part, you know. I'm excited you're coming to SHOT Show. Come say hi. I have a booth there.
I will.
Yeah, Walk Talk definitely. We have a booth this year. We're going. People are dropping out left and right, but that might make it even better for us because it'll be a little bit more intimate.
Mhm.
I'm bummed I can't go because over the last couple of years, I think that WTTA has done its best work. And I was really excited to like be the mental health guy in the gun community and like, you know, hug a bunch of people I haven't seen in a while, but also to have more of this kind of conversation with people who aren't familiar with what we're doing and say, yeah, look, I'm the guy who holds the license and I walk in this other community. Here's how we can move things forward. And unfortunately, it just happened to overlap with a family trip and I'm super bummed I'm not going to be there. But, you know, your point about how the rights getting shored up and protected will allow for more focus on some of the, what I would loosely call professional development, I think is critical. I think that's so key because all those new gun owners, are they getting trained? You know what I mean? Like they bought all their guns in the middle of an ammo shortage and training's pretty expensive too. Are they storing responsibly? I don't know. You know, when people panic buy, they typically don't think about the holistic picture of stuff. So I would want more of the industry to focus on that kind of thing, as well as bringing them into the fold and making sure that they feel welcome, right? If this new demographic had previously had maybe some heartburn about the traditional archetype of the NRA and they didn't think they fit in there, well, where do they fit? You know, and what organizations can they be a part of so that we can continue this camaraderie in a cohesive, forward moving way. It's not just a bunch of fragmented people scattered across the country kind of doing their own thing and also believing they have to fight every fight on their own. It's like, no, we got FPC to do the policy stuff. We've got WTTA to do the mental health stuff. We got, you know, Edgar to do the safe storage stuff in Colorado, you know, whatever it is. And then it's like, you're safe to stay in your lane, just doing training. If you want to do training, you don't have to do advocacy. And then we dial down the neuroticism a little bit and we're all getting along a little bit better and we can share and exchange information. I think that'd be great. That's a great point. Great point.
Well, thanks.
We're into an hour now. And all I'm taking away, I think at this point is that when Cam talks to his wife on the phone, she falls asleep because she's bored. And John is the
Gunshots.
and John's new nickname, middle name is the Lorax. John the Lorax Petrolino. The 2A Lorax.
The two.
I love it. We can make that your official byline at Bearing Arms, John.
I'll talk to my supervisor about that.
Michael Nepotism Sedini.
That's right. Nepotism is the greatest way to go, guys. I'm telling you.
Jacob Emotional Functioning Wiskerson.
I was going to say your last name's Wiskerson. You don't need another name in there. You know, you got it nailed.
You know, it's German, but my mom's whole side's Italian. So, you know, I identify with my Italian brethren there and I talk with my hands and I do a lot of gesticulations. I eat lots of garlic and olive oil. But anyway, I really appreciate you guys coming on. I think this is a really good discussion. I'm humbled every time I get to, you know, interact with people whom I respect and see as leaders in the community. I'm glad you guys are doing what you're doing. I'm really proud that you're choosing to be a part of our organization and associating yourselves with us. It means we're not too off-putting yet. So thanks for that. Mike always asks a question of our guests at the end, and John's already answered this on his appearance earlier, but Cam has yet to answer. So Mike, you should probably ask that now.
Yeah. So Cam, how do you tend to your mental health?
Well, that's a really good question, and probably not as well as I should. You know, so 5 years ago, my wife was diagnosed with lung cancer. And that really threw me for a loop. She has a stage 4 lung cancer. So she is basically, you know, the doctors have said there's no chance of a cure. She's doing incredibly well for somebody who's, had cancer for 5 years. She's not on any oxygen. She actually, as we've been talking, she just drove by to go to her part-time job at a bakery. But it's been a stressful few years. I mean, the last few years, I've lost my job, found a new one, had a wife get diagnosed with cancer. One of my kids, I have five, so I'm going to keep this as generic as possible. One of my kids had a mental health crisis of their own over the past couple of years. So, I think like a lot of guys, I find myself in the role of being the caretaker and the caregiver, and not necessarily the person who does that sort of, mental health checkup. But it's become, I think it's become increasingly important. I mean, like I said, one of the reasons why I quit social media is because I just realized it was making me deeply angry and unhappy about stuff that really is unimportant to me. The only reason I cared about it is because it was in front of my face. And when I logged off of Twitter, when I got off of Facebook, all of a sudden I didn't give a crap about those things anymore. The daily outrage, I think in a lot of ways is really unimportant. So probably one of the best things I've done for my mental health and for my mental wellness is just to separate myself from all of the noise that's out there and to try to focus on what's really important. And for me, that is every day that I get to spend with the person that I love, who I now know is not always going to be with me. My youngest kids are 17. So, all of a sudden I'm confronted with the fact that, oh my God, I'm going to be an empty nester. Hopefully in a couple of years, they're going to leave the house and they're not going to stick around, for another 10 years. So I have been spending more time with the people that I love, the people that are important to me, and choosing to spend less time on the things that are ultimately going to be unimportant to me when I look back at the end of my hopefully long life. And again, I don't think we're ever going to find people who say, man, I wish I spent more time on social media. I wish I had spent more time arguing with strangers on the internet. I just didn't get enough of that. So that to me is really important, just to live in the real world and to, immerse yourself in the real fundamental important things. And I think when you do that, obviously, you can still have your struggles. You can still, have those shaky moments, but I do have a wife that I can talk to. I have friends that I know that I can talk to about almost anything because they can talk to me about almost anything. And that I think is a big part of it too. I don't always say this, but I believe that we should be who we want. We should be who we want to see in this world. And so if we feel like there is empathy lacking in this world, be empathetic. If you feel like this world is just too hate-filled, then put a little love out there. And when you do that, the goal may be to benefit other people, but I think that you end up helping yourself too. So that's been a really important aspect of what I've done over the past couple of years, just to sort of stay grounded and balanced and, not feeling completely out of whack all the time.
It's a pretty solid answer.
Yep.
I'm going to take that to heart. I think I've been wrapped around the axle of social media lately, and I do draw some benefit from it, but that's really well stated.
Well, that's the thing. I know I can't stay away forever. I mean, there's no way that you can be an influencer who doesn't want any influence. So, that's the thing that I've been wrestling with is like, all right, when do I go back and what do I do when I'm confronted with those same things that drove me away from social media in the first place? How do I deal with that better? And I think now that I have the freedom to step away, I'm not going to feel married to social media. And I know that I can take a break whenever it gets to be too much. And I also know that I don't have to be, again, I want to be what I want to see. And I see a lot of jackasses on social media. I see a lot of people who are wasting this magical opportunity to speak with anybody in the world, and what are we going to do with it? We're going to call people names. We're going to insult people. I think I'm in a better space now where when I get back on social media, I'm going to use it for what I want it to be and not for what Jack Dorsey wants Twitter to be, not for what Mark Zuckerberg wants Facebook to be for me. I'm going to use it the way I want to use it so that I get the most out of it.
Yeah. Well, appreciate you guys coming on. Appreciate your time. Respect that. So we'll wrap up here. And so again, John Petrolino, Cam Edwards, both of Bearing Arms fame et al. You guys do other things, etc. I guess et al is for other people. But thank you both very much for your support and your continued contributions to our God-given rights and protecting them, as well as to advance the hybridization of mental well-being and firearms. Thanks, Mike, as always. And on behalf of our sponsors, Arms Corps and Zephyr Wellness, the company that I own here in Northern Nevada. Thanks for listening. Download it, share it around, give us a rating and review. And as always, we wish you great mental wellness. Take care.
All right.
Yeah.